Welcome to another in our series of Kehillat Israel podcasts. This is a recording of Rabbi Amy Bernstein's weekly Friday morning Torah study.
We are going to be studying this morning Leviticus 19. We are beginning our discussion of the Holiness Code. So the Holiness Code is an incredible collection. We are beginning of laws together called H. So when we do our sources, what are our sources? J,
E, P.
J. So let's go in order. J, E, P, and
H. No.
when we write our sources on the board, the four letters J, E, P, and D.
Yeah.
The Deuteronomist.
Deuteronomist.
J, E, P, and D. H is part of P. The argument in the scholarly world is H early or late? Like we've had the conversation about is P early or late? The question then is H early or late? It was normative for a while to consider H as early, but more recently, there's more consensus that H is an addendum to P. And that argument goes that we have P. For P, God is completely non-anthropomorphic. God is completely abstract. God is a force that one has to mitigate one's relationship to because it can be dangerous, right? It doesn't think, it doesn't feel, it doesn't judge, it doesn't punish, it doesn't reward, right? It is abstract completely in P. So you have all of these rituals to mitigate your relationship to that force. If it's in your midst, you are by definition protected because, right, it is a protective energy, but sin will repel it. And so you have to be very careful to make sure the dross of sin is not around so that force can be present. That means some scholars want to discuss it in terms of it really is a static system. God is what it is. You have to do your stuff, to deal with it, but it's a static system. With the coming of the early prophets, Amos, and a lot of the other early prophets in the 8th century, there's a growing gap. We did a lot of this last year. Listen to the podcast from last year on this Parsha, on the Holiness Code, to get a deeper story about it. There becomes a huge divide, a really growing divide between rich and poor. And the prophets are yelling and screaming about the fact that everybody thinks, all I have to do to mitigate my relationship to this force is bring the right sacrifices, right? And do all the right rituals and observe the purity laws and bring my sacrifice when I screw something up, right? So, that's all I have to do to mitigate, to deal with this force. And the prophets are yelling and screaming about that, saying, no, it is deeper than that. It is about treating people well. It's about ethics and morals. That does not appear in the priestly literature. Ethics and morals are not really a big component of mitigating the relationship to this force. In response to those prophets, a lot of people are arguing we get the priestly writing H. The priests responding with a collection of laws that address the ethical and moral issues happening in Israel. And in that sense, the power to impact the relationship between Israel and its God moves out of the Mishkan and into society. Okay? And what I talked about before as being static now is understood as dynamic. That our behavior influences and impacts the relationship and the proximity of the divine to the people. Okay? This is a major shift. Because when we talked a few months ago, months, I can't keep track, about the fact that, remember, we talked about the sanctuary of silence, Israel Knoll's work about the sanctuary of silence, that it's silent. It's the popular religion that has a lot of, psalms and dancing and, music and whatever. But the sanctuary is silent. So very removed from the life of the people. This is a revolution in that it reads the people and their behavior into whether or not Yud He Vav He will be concentrated and present. Okay. So this is a major shift, and it is its own work within P. So we're going to see how it's a little bit different than what we're used to reading in P. All right. So that's my short synopsis. Again, listen to the podcast from last year if you want a more in-depth discussion. So let's look at, so what is this H? What goes on with H? And we're just gonna read for a bit. By the way, this is what we read as non-traditional communities. This is what we read on Yom Kippur instead of the Avodah service, instead of the long description of what the high priest did. Speaking of technology inside the sanctuary of silence, that has nothing to do with the people, right? We don't read that. We read Leviticus 19. Oh, sorry. I misspoke. I'm sorry. We read this instead of the laws about sexual impropriety and who one can properly be engaged with and who not. Sorry, I misspoke. We still have the Avodah service in the afternoon. All right. But we don't give that a lot of focus. Okay. How come I can't see my screen share? Okay.
It's verse 1, right?
There we go. 19, Kedoshim, 19:1. Vayikra Adonai Moshe lemor. God says to Moshe, saying, Daber kol adat b'nei Yisrael ve'amarta alehem kedoshim tiyu, ki kadosh ani Adonai Elohechem. This is the intro to the Holiness Code. This is the basis for all of it. What is the basis? First of all, who is Moshe supposed to speak to, according to verse 2?
All the people.
All the people. So lots of our traditional commentators say that this was revelation given to all the people. Remember, Moshe's writing most of Revelation, but some of our commentators want to argue not this. This is Kol Adat B'nei Israel. This is revelation given to all the people because according to them, this is where really the core of Torah is. Everything really important in Torah is here, which is interesting for something that was addended. Appended?
Amended.
No, it wasn't amended. It was appended to P.
Yeah.
Right? So it's interesting that they find the core of Torah here, something that was a later, right, addition. Okay. So what is the basis of the Holiness Code? Kedoshim tihu. And we're going to spend a lot of time with these two words because Aviva Zornberg says this is the entire foundation of the Holiness Code. Kedoshim tihu. How do you translate, Hannah, Betsy, tihu?
You will be.
You will be. Okay? Kedoshim tihu. Holy. We're going to talk about what that means. Kedoshim tihu. Holy will y'all be. Betsy, why did you choose to translate it, will you be in the future?
Because because of the letters.
Because what does it not say?
Well, it doesn't say it's not in present tense. It's probably in future.
Because what would it be if it was in present tense?
In present tense, atem.
Kedoshim atem.
Yeah.
Y'all are holy. Doesn't say that. This is important for Zornberg. And I think there might be a high holiday sermon here. So I need y'all to listen carefully. And I need a thumbs up or thumbs down at the end of class. Should I go down this rabbit hole for the high holidays? Okay. Kedoshim, right, exactly, preview. Kedoshim tiyu. Holy shall y'all be. It is not present tense. Ki kadosh ani Adonai Elohechem. Because I, Yud He Vav He, am kadosh. That is the basis of the commandment, y'all shall be holy, because I, Yud He Vav He, am holy. This is imitat yodei. Now, we're going to get some examples of what does that mean? If we're kadosh, if we start behaving as if we're an am kadosh, a holy people, what would that look like? Ish imo ve'aviv tira'u, a person, their mother and father, they shall revere, and my Shabbatot, they will observe. Ani Adonai Elohechem. I am Yod He Vav He, your God. Do not turn to idols. or make molten elim for yourselves. I, Yud He Vav He, am your God. When you sacrifice an offering of well-being to Yud He Vav He, sacrifice it so that it may be accepted on your behalf. Bringing it is not enough. In P, bringing it is enough. Now, you can imagine our commentators go crazy with, what does this mean? We're not going there. It shall be eaten. Well, here's some examples, right? It shall be eaten on the day you sacrifice it or on the following day, but what is left by the third day must be consumed in fire. If it should be eaten on the third day, it is an offensive thing. It will not be acceptable. So this is sacrificial stuff written for the people, right? The other priestly material we get is instructions for the priests. So this could seem like Department of Redundancy department, God forbid, but it's not, because this is written for the people. Anyone who eats of it, meaning the part you're not supposed to, shall bear the guilt for having profaned what is sacred to Yud He Vav He, right? Chilel. It's a chilul, and that person shall be cut off. Nichrata. We get this punishment a lot. Nichrata. We have lots of interpretations of what nichrata, what it means to be cut off. Nefesh. People want to say, oh, well, your soul is cut off. Nefesh does not mean soul in the Bible. There's no difference between the soul and the body biblically. That's rabbinic and later. Nefesh in the Bible means self. This self shall be cut off from your people. We don't know what that means. What we do know is that probably it's not a punishment that you can tell, right? Like, this person shall be cut. Like, what does that? If it means they're not going to have a lot of descendants, so they're cut off from the people as the people moves forward. We don't know, but it seems to be a punishment that is not evident. Okay. When you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap all the way to the edges of your field or gather the gleanings of your harvest, right? You shall not pick your vineyard bare or gather the fallen fruit of your vineyard. You shall leave them for the poor and the stranger. I, Yud He Vav He, am your God. This is considered ethical and moral legislation. You shall not steal. You shall not deal deceitfully or falsely with one another. You shall not swear falsely by my name, profaning the name of your God. I am Yud He Vav He. You shall not defraud your fellow Israelite. You shall not commit robbery. The wages of a laborer, this means a day laborer who's paid in cash, shall not remain with you until morning, because they need that money, right? So you may not withhold. Once someone does the work and if they're expecting to be paid, this is not someone you have an account with. Right, this is somebody who you know, Freddie, who comes to our place to wash cars. You can't have Freddie wash your car and say, oh, you know what? I don't have any money. I'll pay you next week. Right? Freddie depends on that cash, like, to feed his family. Lo tikal re'el choresh v'lifnei iver lo titen michshol. You shall not insult the deaf or place a stumbling block before the blind. You shall revere your God. I am Yud He Vav He. This is not literal. I was studying this obviously with the B'nai Mitzvah who are having their ceremonies this Shabbat. So I said to them, what does this mean? And they're like, well, you shouldn't trip someone who's blind. I'm like, okay. Yeah, right. And you shouldn't curse a deaf person. I said, what does that mean? And they said, well, you shouldn't say something nasty about somebody who can't hear you. I'm like, okay, you have done a great job of unpacking literally what the metaphor means. Now, talk to me about why Torah would say this. Does Torah really think that an Israelite would put something in front of a blind person? And like, if they're deaf, who cares if you insult them? They can't hear you, right? And so it's like, and they're like,
if a tree falls in the forest and no one's there.
It's the same idea, because it doesn't matter if they're dead or not. You still should.
well, sort of. It's more like if you tip over a cow and no one's around, did it moo when it fell? That's closer. If a tree falls in the woods, nothing happened. You're causing. This is your behavior that said, talk to me. So what am I asking these kids? Answer the question I asked the kids. What is this talking about? What is this talking about?
It's like how you act. About how you act with others. Being kind to others.
Huh?
It's like about not making things unnecessarily hard for other people.
Not making it unnecessarily hard. If I put a stumbling block in front of a blind person, okay, so that's cruel because what's going to happen?
They're going to fall.
They're going to fall. And when you put that stumbling block there, did you suspect they might fall? You knew they would fall. So what is Torah saying?
Don't have bad intent. To be considerate. Be considerate and sensitive, and to be helpful. The reverse of
anything to do with God knowing.
This whole code depends on God knowing. So we're going to talk about what Zornberg, where she goes with some of this. It is dependent on you believing God sees. All right. Putting a stumbling block before the blind. I don't see it as a blind person. You as a sighted person go and get something that you know I can't see. This means if I go to someone from this congregation, I won't name names, who always helps me broker a deal on my new car, whatever car I'm getting. If I go to him and say, you are in the car business, your family's in the car business, will you help me? This means if he purposefully steers me wrong in those negotiations because he's taking a cut from the Volvo dealership, that is what this means. He knows I don't understand the car business. I'm blind. And he takes advantage of my blindness and causes me to fall, causes me to lose money or get into a bad deal. That's what this means.
Why isn't it stated in the positive?
Yeah.
Support people.
Be helpful.
Because it's going to our worst tendencies to take advantage of somebody who has no ability to defend themselves. It's not just about supporting each other. It's about do not transgress your temptation to take advantage of somebody who doesn't understand this contract. You might be tempted to do that.
Is your example worse because he gets a kickback? He goes to bed thinking, I got a kickback. Amy thanked me 500.
That's right, because you're unknowing.
Well, even more. Yeah.
Right? So, or maybe I find out I'm in a terrible deal, right? I fall, I trip. So it's saying you shouldn't be a person who takes advantage of other people's blind spots for your own benefit. So, and the same goes to why does Torah say don't curse someone who's deaf? If they're deaf, they can't hear you. What does it matter?
About gossip.
So partly they can't hear you, but other people can. Very good. Other people might hear you.
Isn't this just another way of stating what's in the verse before, but in a different context? The verse before is talking about not defrauding people. Well, to some extent, saying things about the deaf or putting stumbling blocks before the blind is a way of defrauding people from their default belief that other people are good.
That's a great way. That's one thing. That's one thing it does. It does lots of things. That's one of the things it does. It damages people's assessment that they thought was right, and now they find out is wrong, right? And what your point is exactly the point. This is not really about the victim. This is not about that. This law is directed at you, Israelites.
It adds an element of maliciousness, your maliciousness.
There's an element of erosion of character that happens. Yeah, the deaf person doesn't hear you. Don't be somebody who insults somebody that if they can't hear you, guess what they can't do?
Yeah.
Take retribution, right? They can't come back and defend themselves.
This is telling us that in all situations, we should be a mensch.
We should be a mensch. That is exactly the translation of the Holiness Code. You should be a mensch. And it's stated in, here's what a mensch does not do. And I ask this of the kids, because one of my questions in their speech, I ask them, what kind of an adult do you want to be? And so especially I'm not going to say it. Okay. So from a certain kind of kid, I get nice, Good. Thank you. Okay. So what does a nice person do? What does a nice person not do? That is what Torah is saying. Here's what a mensch doesn't do, because it's tempting. Don't allow your character to become eroded, right? That is the most unmenschlich. Then you're an unmensch, right? Right. Yes.
I want to ask you another question about this negative positive, the way you say it. Hillel's comment of do not undo others as you would not have them do unto you, as opposed to the positive side of that. Why is the negative?
I think why is the wrong question. It's just the style. That's the way it is.
Okay, so it's not.
Truly, I think we're making a bigger deal of it. We get into this binary of negative, positive. Is it good? Is it bad? Why not say it good when saying bad? It's saying don't be an asshole. Like, be a mensch is a little more vague. Don't be a dick. Is pretty. And here's how. Don't be that guy. Don't be that woman who, is catty and talking about, right? It's a little more pointed than, because you're right. The meaning is be a mensch. But if you're not a mensch, it's, well, what does that mean? Right. Well, let me be very clear, says Torah. Don't be that guy. Don't be that person that the minute someone leaves the room, you've got something catty to say. Don't do that. And it's addressed to a bunch of people who, guess what? Do that. And don't tell me we don't all do it. Don't curse the deaf means as soon as someone leaves the room and can't hear you, don't do what you're all, what we are all tempted to do, which is have something to say about it, right? I don't want to hammer it too hard, but I want to say that's the kind of thing the Holiness Code is concerned with. And so even something just simple like that we tend to just read over, look how long we've talked about that one verse, right? Because it goes to the core of character.
And if we've ever had that done to us, been the one who's been tripped or whatever, we remember it forever.
Oh, forever. Oh, boy. Yeah. 6th grade? Whew. 6th grade? I still shudder when I touch those memories.
I mean, this whole chapter still starts out with a positive. You shall be like,
Mm-hmm.
So it's not.
Yes.
Not all that's the main point. And then it goes on.
Yes. So the main point is, you shall be holy because I am holy. Here's some of the things you should do, and here's some of the things you shouldn't do. You're right. Thank you for pointing that out, that there are positives as well. All right. So here's something else we're not supposed to do. You shall not render an unfair decision, because one of you may become a judge, right? Do not render an unfair decision. Do not favor the poor or show deference to the rich. Judge your kin fairly. You have to judge based on the facts. You can't say because this person has had such a terrible life, right? I'm going to sway my decision. Do not deal basely with members of your people. Do not profit by the blood of your, what? Interesting. Okay, so that's an interpretation. The Hebrew literally, lo ta'amod al dam re'echa, do not stand on the blood of your neighbor. Okay, so this is an interpretation. Do not profit by the blood of your. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying that's an interpretation. Normally, what do you see on a bumper sticker or a T-shirt? How do you see this translated? Lo ta'amod al dam re'echa is translated, do not stand idly by, right? As the blood of your neighbor is spilt, do not stand there. Don't do nothing. Which seems a little more accurate to me than this translation, but I'm not going to argue it because I didn't study it. Do not hate your brother in your heart. Now notice, who's in verse 16? Whose blood are you not supposed to stand idly by? Your neighbor. Who are you not supposed to hate? Your brother. Don't you think, like, normally we would flip those, right? Don't let something happen to a member of your family and not, stand up for them. Don't let them pick on your little brother. Don't you think that's how, right? And then don't hate your neighbor, right? The person living over there that you can't stand. Don't hate them in your heart. It's the opposite. Don't hate your brother, because who do we really hate the most? The people we're closest to. I mean, it's probably also talking about brother, meaning your Israelite, but a fellow Israelite. But right, I love that it's stated as your brother, because we tend to get most irritated by the folks closest to us, right? So
we don't hate them more, but we sure will take it out.
yeah, you may not hate them. What?
Hate our family members more, but we will take it out of them. Yeah, because they're there and they're familiar.
I think also there's an intensity though to in close proximity people. Like when you're really angry at them or can't stand them, right? There's an intensity to that I often don't feel with people that like, okay, whatever, they're idiots, whatever. Like, I mean, I don't like it and I can't stand them, but whatever, but.
Not invested.
Right. But let my sister say something. And I became a screaming lunatic within seconds. Bert and Carol Kleinman raised their hand.
Briefly, this is all about just Israelites and your family. Was this later interpreted to be like anybody? Or is this just like do this for your people and your family, but not other people?
Bert, why do you always have to complicate everything? It depends.
Because anti-Semites.
Yes, it depends. So there's varying degrees among varying commentators about what is owed varying degrees of relationships, including Jew to Jew and Jew to non-Jew. That's where I will leave it. But to the business of you shall be a mensch, cultivating a certain character, that is universal because that's not about who you're dealing with. That's about you. And so the Musar tradition, for instance, or Kabbalah, right, is concerned with who you are. And so that means like, don't become somebody who wants to do that to anybody, which I think is here. I think that's the spirit of this here. But if you're going to take it as halacha, as actual law, then you get arguments in the Talmud about who is re'echa, who technically is achicha, your brother, who technically is your neighbor. Because once you've got Jews dealing with non-Jews and they're a foot down, like it's just a more complicated thing once you're turning it into actual practical law. All right. You shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against members of your people. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am Yud-Heh Vav-Heh. Et chukotai tishmeru. You shall observe my laws. You shall not let your cattle mate with a different kind. You shall not sow your field with two kinds of seed. You shall not put on cloth from a mixture of two kinds of material. All right, there's a shotness. If a man has carnal relations with a woman who is a slave and has been designated for another man, but has not been redeemed or given her freedom, there shall be an indemnity. They shall not, however, be put to death since she has not been freed, right? So this is protecting her from being violated in terms of her status and then dumped. So this is protection for a female slave. I don't want to get into the cultural whatever about this because I want to go somewhere else. But he must bring to the entrance of the tent of meeting as his guilt offering to Yud-Heh Vav-Heh a ram of guilt because he took a woman whose sexuality was designated as owned by someone else. With the ram of guilt offering, the priest shall make expiation for him before God for the sin he committed, and the sin that he committed will be forgiven him. When you enter the land, any plant, any tree or food, you shall regard its fruit as forbidden. 3 years it shall be forbidden for you not to be eaten. Fruit-bearing trees, you leave them alone for 3 years, right? I'm not a farmer, but there's something about if you take the fruit in the first 3 years, I think it hinders the tree.
It will produce more if you let it grow fully before you start.
What Hannah said. In the 4th year, its fruit shall be set aside, right, for God. And only in the 5th year may you use its fruit, that its yield to you may be increased. See, there you go, that its yield may be increased. I am Yod-Heh Vav-Heh, your God. You shall not eat anything with its blood. You shall not practice divination or soothsaying. Your men shall not round off the side growth of the head or destroy the side growth of your beard. This is why some people have payas. You shall not make ashes in your flesh for the dead, because people did that, or incise any marks on yourselves. This is where people get all crazy about tattoos. It's just crazy to me what gets carried forward as you can't do that or you go to hell or something. It's just like, really? But you cut the side of your beard. Right, like what we hang on to and what we don't is just very interesting as an anthropologist. To me, it's the same weight here. If you go ahead and shave here, why do you care about the next line that you can't have a tattoo? Right.
Well, I think there's an additional thing since the war.
No. I mean, yes, there's an added thing. That is not where people get crazy. That is not what they get crazy about. They get crazy about you can't be buried in a Jewish cemetery. You're Like it's the worst thing. And it's not about the Holocaust. It's this taboo that you can't do that to your body. It's so un-Jewish. And it's like, but you can do to your body taking off the side growth. In Torah, it has the same weight, but it didn't going forward. There's a whole separate category of how people feel about tattoos since the Holocaust. That's a whole nother thing. All right. So I want to stop here. But you get an idea about, the kinds of things, and it's a huge range of things, that are addressed in terms of, Kedoshim to you. All right. But I want to go back to the basic concept, Kedoshim to you. So we've seen some evidence about what Torah, the Holiness Code, thinks about what behaviors fall into. You shall be holy. But what is this holiness? I'm very fascinated by this. As an English major, that was a terrible sentence. I'm fascinated by this. I'm very interested in this idea of holiness, because I think we use the word like we know what it means, but how would you define holiness? Aside from be a mensch and don't be a dick, what would you, I think we use the word as if we know what it means, right? So, I'm fascinated by this concept, as are some other folks. So here we have Leviticus 19:2, Kedoshim to you, ki kadosh ani Adonai, right? You shall be holy because I am holy. Rashi says, as I said earlier, speak unto all the congregation of Israel, teaches us that this section was proclaimed in full assembly. This revelation was given to everybody because most of the fundamental teachings of the Torah are dependent on it and contained in it. You shall be holy. What does this mean to Rashi? This means keep aloof from the forbidden sexual relations just mentioned and from sinful thoughts. It is evident that this is the meaning of Kedoshim to you because wherever you find in the Torah a command to fence yourself in against such relations, you also find mention of holiness. Examples are, and he gives us all of these examples that are related to human sexuality and that they are followed by the word kadosh. So Rashi says, well, it's obvious. If you're wondering what kadosh is about, well, let's look at every place where we see kadosh in other contexts, and we find it a lot about human sexuality. Why? Why so much about human sexuality? Because who is this written to? Basically, Israelite men. Where do men tend to not be a mensch the most? Not me. It's right here. I'm not saying anything other than what Rashi is saying. Rashi is saying the place men tend to not take their menschlichkeit seriously is in their sex life, in sexuality. Okay. So then it means fence yourself off from that behavior. That's what kadosh means, because kadosh actually means what? As we've talked about a million times. What does that word actually mean? Set apart. Separate. Good. Separate, set apart. So Rashi is saying it's about self-separating.
It is interesting that it's like kadosh is about set apartness, but all of the things that make you kadosh are about how you relate to other people. That's like about connectedness.
So cut yourself off from behaviors that would cut you off.
Right. It's just interesting that there's that sort of...
It's beautiful. Beautiful, Hannah. Beautiful insight. Rope yourself off from the things that would rope you off, right? From being in a healthy community, contributing to a healthy community, all of that stuff. Okay? So Ramban, as my yeshiva high school teacher used to say, Ramban, as opposed to Rambam. So Ramban, Nachmanides, abstain from the forbidden sexual relationships in the preceding section and from other sin. This is based also on the Gur Aryeh on Rashi, because wherever you find, right, in Torah, a warning to guard against immorality, now it's a bigger word, immorality, you find the mention of holiness. This is Rashi's language. Nachmanides is quoting Rashi. But in the Torah Kohanim, meaning in the priestly Torah, in P, I have seen it mentioned without any qualification, right? Without any particular reference to immorality. And so he brings this idea that kadosh is not always tied to immorality, this idea of self-restraint. Similarly, the rabbis taught, you shall be holy, for I am holy. Just as I am holy, so be you holy. Just as I am pure, so you shall be pure. And in my opinion, says Nachmanides, this abstinence does not refer only to restraint from acts of immorality, as Rashi wrote, but it is rather the self-control mentioned throughout Talmud, which confers upon those who practice in the name of Prushim, Pharisees, literally those who are separated from self-indulgence, or those who practice self-restraint. The meaning thereof is as follows. The Torah has admonished us against immorality and forbidden foods, but permitted sexual intercourse between man and his wife, and the act of eating certain meat and wine. If so, a man of desire could consider this to be a permission to be passionately addicted to sexual intercourse with his wife, or many wives, and be among wine bibbers, among gluttonous eaters of flesh, as we see in Proverbs, and speak freely all profanities, since this prohibition has not been expressly mentioned in the Torah, and thus he will become a sordid person within the permissible realm of the Torah. God forbid. Therefore, after having listed the matters which God prohibited altogether, Scripture followed them up by a general command that we practice moderation even in matters which are permitted. So what does Nachmanides say? Nachmanides is saying it's not just about what's forbidden us to do. Even within the categories of what's permitted, be a mensch. Yes, you can have sex with your wife. Do you need to do it all the time to the exclusion of other pursuits? Right? Yes, you're allowed to eat meat and drink wine. Should you do that all the time and be a Henry VIII kind of glutton because you can afford it and it's permitted? No, you are supposed to be someone, right, who puts on yourself restraint, that you show an appreciation for moderation. You're not hurting anybody by eating meat and drinking wine all day and being in bed with your wife all day. You're not hurting anybody. Well, maybe you're hurting your wife, but she's like, oh my God already. Yeah. So you're not hurting anybody. You're not crossing a line that says it's forbidden, but it doesn't make you a person of character if that's kind of what you're about all the time, right? Do you know people like this who they're not doing anything technically wrong, but it's also really? That's how you choose to spend your time? Okay. All right.
Deterioration too of the self.
Say more about that.
Well, if you're constantly say drinking or about being in bed with your wife or your husband, but it's very self-absorbed. It's very it takes away from your soul. Your soul deteriorates because you're not using the muscle of your heart to love.
Literally and figuratively, the muscle of your heart.
Right.
Right. So yeah,
pun intended.
Yeah, pun intended. You don't. Okay. So part of it is what Zornberg talks about is you deteriorate in character. And as your character deteriorates, your behaviors tend to deteriorate, which then reinforces the deterioration of your character, right? And so it's really about guard against doing, even within that which is permitted, that which will pull you into being someone of character that you don't want to be.
Having observed the practices in the ultra-Orthodox community, I see that so much of the way in which they create these fences around their behavior is to avoid temptation. We experienced that when my son was visiting, and we couldn't even take them to the beach if it was a nice day, because then he might see scantily clad women.
Correct. So this, however much we might find it ridiculous, I did very much appreciate that about being in the traditional world. I very much appreciated how everything was done to help support your decision to be a mensch. a lot of things were considered forbidden. They're not forbidden by Torah. They're not doraita. And they would admit that this is not doraita. But in order to put a fence around laws that are doraita, that are from the Torah, you have a lot of other laws because it supports your ability to not transgress, right?
I don't know, there's a thin line between that and being becoming a very repressive
Correct.
society, which has lots of people in it who transgress like crazy secretively because they're so repressed in that society. And it's sort of, you think the opposite, people who embrace life in the extreme in a million different ways. I mean, maybe the diversity of their embracing life is sort of, that's a good thing, or is that something that they should pull back from?
I think both categories, those who are repressed and those who are indulgent everywhere, both have people who then act out because of their approach to life, right? Or just because of who they are and what their particular pressures, are. And you can take somebody and switch them and they might have done better, right? In a different community based on their personality, right? This is suggesting, according to many of our interpreters, it's a path of moderation. And they use that language, as you said, Rick. It's about moderation. You shouldn't be polyamorous all over the place, however consensual it all is. And you shouldn't, I'm not saying you shouldn't be polyamorous. I'm saying, when you're obsessed with permitted and healthy sexual relationships and that's all you do, it's not forbidden, but whatever. So, the ADD mind at work, you can just watch the things that happen, the battle inside. But the repressive can be equally contributive to transgressing. All right. What did somebody say?
Oh, I was saying you're doing great.
Thank you, Margo. Thank you for your empathy. Yes.
In the theoretical scenario they're setting up to help you live your life in a holy way, it doesn't mean they're denying you everything. You have your, Shabbat mitzvah with your husband and wife on, every Friday night. Sometimes that might be a nice thing. People who are busy. Just this week, someone said to me, oh, there was a box of Seeds candy and it was a milk chocolate piece right before dinner. And he said, I want to have meat. Oh my God, they're not going to get that milk chocolate Seeds candy because they want to have meat for dinner and their time won't be enough. But, they can have the milk chocolate 3 hours later. It's like
4 hours later. But
okay. So it was extreme on the one hand. On the other hand, if you look at this as a lesson in moderation.
Right. So P.S. It's half an hour. Milk before meat. It's 4 hours. The milk after meat. So just to be clear, they only had to wait 30 minutes. So it's a little misleading. But the other thing is you take the Seeds candy and you save it. Right. Yes, it's about just being aware. It's about awareness. But I want to make sure we get deeper into Zornberg, because it's so yummy and rich. All right. So first of all, she's talking about Ramban, who says that it goes, Torah's bringing specifics, but it moves to a commandment that is klali, that is general, right? How to be a more refined person. That's how she's interpreting Nachmanides, beyond all the specifics and details, right? She says, to become holy, lihiot, as we said, Kedoshim tiyu, you shall be holy, is not in the present tense, it's in the future tense. And she says this is related to God's self-revelation to Moshe at the bush. Ehyeh asher ehyeh. I will be what I will be. I will be who I will be. Meaning God's self is always becoming. And therefore, if you want to do imitatio Dei, I love this. If you want to do imitatio Dei, ki ani Adonai, you shall do it because I do it. What is one of the bases? Somebody, can you mute unless you're trying to ask a question? Somebody's talking and trying to, I don't know if they're trying to ask a question. Mehmet? Yes?
God is a reconstructionist.
God is a reconstructionist. Love that. So God is owning God's own becoming as the nature of God. If that's the nature of God, Kedoshim tiyu, you shall keep becoming also. I love this. I love this. Even God is not done. So if you want to imitate God, you're not done. So don't think just because, now I don't do that and now I don't do this and now I'm in moderation about that. There's still always a way for you to become something you're not yet. Just like Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh. I love this. I'm telling you, I think there's a sermon here. It means going beyond, right, the minimum requirements, says Zornberg. And she says it's about aspiration. It's about Kedoshim to you. Y'all are commanded to aspire. And she says in Latin, aspire means to breathe towards.
I really almost didn't remember. And then, great. Do you have a shopping bag? Thanks.
Alex, do you want to mute? Aspire means to breathe towards, which I never put that together, right? And I'm an English major. So this idea that you are commanded to be breathing towards something, you are commanded to continue becoming. And the way she calls this, Zornberg calls this a moment of irony. What does she mean by that? She says we have an understanding of who we are, but what we're commanded to do is live into a moment of, is that enough? So let's say I'm a good teacher. I consider and this is her example. This is not me. I'm a good teacher. I feel good about that. I feel good about my skills of, my career. When we're aspiring, in that moment of aspiration, we go to this moment of, but am I the best teacher I could be in this moment? Right? Like what? She calls it this moment of going to a place where we're not certain anymore. We're not so certain about who we are. That is the work of aspiration. So it's not constant, but it should be a constant in your life. It should happen, I don't know, consistently. Like it doesn't have to happen every second or then you'd never get anything done, right? But it should be a constant part of your life. And I know, Hannah, you have to go. It's an ethical moment, she says. This is an ethical process, Kedoshim to you, that you want to be better. She says it's a moment of desire, and she says it's a moment of eros with the divine, right? It's a moment of eros. It's an erotic moment that we desire. We desire to be closer to the divine. Tihiyu li, you shall be for me, because if we figure it out, you shall be for me. And she says, what is this li? What is you shall be to me? That's what we say under the chuppah. Ani l'dodi, v'dodi li. It is an intimacy, and it is a move towards aspiration for intimacy with the divine and cultivating a desire to be more intimate with the divine. And the way we do that is to continue becoming. I think in our culture, we are so loath to admit we're not something. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's very hard for us to say, I'm not yet someone who fill in the blank. It's very hard for us. We're very situated in what we are, what we have, what we've accomplished, right? Our degrees are all framed on our walls, as are our awards. They're all framed on the wall. We're very rooted in what we've accomplished, right? And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. I'm saying it's so skewed that way that it's very hard for us to own yearning and longing to be more, better, intimate with what that means, what that would call from us. We are loath to own that as an extraordinarily positive approach.
For me, travel does that.
Mm-hmm.
It says, I'm not there yet. I haven't gotten there.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not talking about a place. In the learning about life, I haven't reached it.
Mm-hmm. So there's lots of ways we can cultivate what Zornberg's talking about. And for you, travel is one of them. Continue to expose yourself to things that are new. Continue to expose yourself, right, to situations where you're not the one who's comfortable, right, and familiar with everything that's happening.
It's a medical thing. When my doctor talks about being old, I say no. It's not being old, it's being mature. And mature means that you keep going.
Right. Exactly. We have to aspire. We have to aspire. So now we get a later commentary on your sheet. The way both the Magid and the Ma'or Vashemesh approach holiness, says Dr. Rabbi Josh Feigelson, is a refreshing change from the emphasis on separation in so many other commentaries. This goes, Lisa, to your point. We find holiness not only or perhaps even primarily through making sure things are separated between good and bad, pure and impure, kosher and unkosher. Rather, and most importantly, we bring holiness into the world through opening ourselves to witness and experience the profound wisdom of creation and the Creator. Because in Kabbalah, holiness is attached to chokhmah, to wisdom. We can go through our whole lives making sure we do everything just right by the books, following the rules very punctiliously. But unless we open our hearts in this way, meaning to finding chokhmah, the deep wisdom in the world, and enable ourselves to connect the holiness of the created world with that of the worlds that exist beyond our physical senses, we're unlikely to experience a genuine sense of wholeness. Without that sense of profound interconnection, our conception of holiness remains limited, brittle, and dry. With it, our appreciation of holiness takes on new life. Accessing holiness becomes less a project rooted in the fear of contamination and more in the love of connecting, relating, weaving together. It ceases to be grounded in the anxiety of incompletion, instead becoming rooted in the profound joy of recognizing and experiencing the wholeness of the universe and our lives within it. Right? A really beautiful, positive statement by Kabbalah on what holiness is, rather than what some people want to make it about, which is what is not, what you should refrain from. Right? So Rabbi Pamela Wax says, going back to Nachmanides, this self-restraint and self-control becomes central to Nachmanides' understanding of holiness. With this term, and it's a term he uses about what we're trying to achieve with holiness, Nachmanides pinpoints where Musar and Halakha part company. What is permitted by Jewish law may not, in fact, be permissible by Musar standards, right? How do you translate Musar? Thank you. Ethical behavior. Holiness, therefore, is more than what is explicitly prescribed by Torah. This gets at the distinction we often draw between the spirit and the letter of the law. But where the spirit of the law is typically used as an excuse for more lenient behaviors, here it means that we should actually be more exacting and self-regulating in matters that reflect the spirit of the law. For Nachmanides, the letter of the law may actually permit unethical excess. In this way, Nachmanides reminds us that holiness is not just about what we do or don't do, but also about our character. Therefore, to be holy is to undergo an extended process in character formation and moral growth, a kind of Musar immersion program. So that is really what the holiness code is, right? According to Rabbi Pamela Wax's stuff about Nachmanides, it's an character refinement immersion course. So what would that look like for us? Where do we get that? Where do we immerse in things that draw us towards challenging how we understand ourselves and that cultivates in us a desire to be better? Where do we find that? Where's our immersion course? The holiness code is clear. Okay. Well, most of us don't sit down and read Leviticus 19 when we're going, I really want to be a better person.
Two people here who have an answer to that question. Where you
raise your hands. So raise your hands.
Analysis and therapy to analyze where you are.
That's spirituality.
Yes.
So talk to me about spirituality. What's spirituality? So is just a belief in something bigger than yourself enough?
Well,
So Zornberg says the whole thing turns on, do you believe there is something bigger that knows who you are and that watches, and doesn't have to mean watches with eyes, right? That there's something bigger that has a standard that grokks where you are, and that your attachment to that always brings you to a place of aspiration. in wanting to be attached to that, to me, in relationship to that. And I might see it as a part of myself. I might see it as the best of myself. When I'm wanting to be close to that, intimate with that, it always calls me into better behavior and to a desire to be better, right? Because there are times I don't even desire to be better. That's when there are times aren't there times we're just numb to wanting to be better? It's like, I'm tired. I don't care. I'm going to binge and I don't care. I don't care. But those are the times. What do I desire? I desire to be better, right? The desire's missing. And then I long for the longing. Because when I'm in longing, I tend to cultivate, okay, so where are you wanting to be better? Like what, and then doing stuff that helps me do that and helps me get there.
But the entire story that we have in the Torah is of progress and regression. And that's how we are.
Sure. That's how we're put together, of course.
Shabbat is a time given to us to cultivate that.
Yes. So I think,
if you
right.
therapy a few times a week, it's like, when can you do it if you got that?
So this is why we have two verbs in the Torah for Shabbat. We have Shabbat, to cease and desist and rest, and we have yinafash, from nefesh, from self, the verb to reselfify, because it's not just about cessation. It's not just about, Mark, I can't think when there's talking going on. It's me. I have major auditory processing issues. I'm missing a filter that everybody else seems to have. So it's not just about stopping, it's about doing. So what are the ways we cultivate, Rick, our awareness that there's something bigger than us? How do we cultivate our relationship to that? And then what that calls forward from our refinement, right? Like that's the yinafash part of Shabbat. And that's the part we don't talk about a lot, is how to reselfify. What are the behaviors we can do to cultivate a desire to be better?
Well, just as Shabbat is one of our technologies in our tradition, so is Musar, in a sense.
Yeah.
In that, you've got the various attributes, the midot, that, in Musar practice, you're going to have this program of regularly, this week I'll be working on this, how do I better demonstrate patience, or how do I better demonstrate love, and you become intentional. So for some people in our tradition, Shabbat's the right technology. For other people, Musar's the right technology. But the whole point of Leviticus 19 is if we are all supposed to be in a process of becoming, then we're each going to need to find our own technologies for doing that.
Exactly. And how strong is our desire to find it?
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, what I love about this, and where I think there's a sermon, is where are we cultivating the desire to desire a practice that keeps us on the right track, right? Where do we cultivate that? The desire to become. Where's that encouraged? Study. For me, for sure. Meditation, for sure.
Weekly Torah study.
Torah study. Good, Margot.
I think that's one of the reasons that community is so important to this tradition.
Beautiful, Nick. Community, because we tend to do better
see other people
when we see people behaving in a certain way. When we're around role models, Sarah Moskowitz. When we're around people who are models and examples for us about, right, how we want to be in the world, then, right, it's so helpful.
I was just thinking, it's almost engendering a consciousness that the world has a conscience, that everything around us, and that to live with that notion. I guess it creates an intention.
Yes. And intention is what we're trying to cultivate. The intention to become, to aspire, to want to become towards something. And I think that is a beautiful corrective to the individualistic, consumer-based, achievement-based this is what makes you valuable. This is what makes you a good person culture that we're living in right now. Let's continue the work and let's continue the conversation. Shabbat Shalom.
You've been listening to Rabbi Amy Bernstein's Friday morning Torah study from Kehillat Israel in Pacific Palisades, California. For more information, go to our website, www.ourki.org.